I'm a lifelong superhero aficionado, and superhero cartoons were my gateway to them since I really didn't immerse myself in the comics until I was like in my mid-20s. But growing up, I got to see the best superhero cartoons the 60s had to offer, and I had a good decade of having no idea about the worst. Welcome to my channel, KC, that's me, Carrie Tug the Sledge Storyteller. Here, I love talking about storytelling as an art form, its many mediums, and its history. But if you like this video, please click like. If you like this channel, please click subscribe, and while you're at it, make one more click on the notification button. Thank you. Anyway, but one common cartoon term is fluidity. And by comparison to what the Fleischer Brothers could do from 1918 with Coco the Clown cartoons to the kind of art cartoons that Disney could accomplish in the early 50s, the studio's saying that in the 60s would be at varying degrees, what they say about fluidity, we wish. But after a decade of languishing box office returns because of readily available entertainment from TV, every animation studio's budget had to be slashed, and yes, even Disney, and that they had to develop the cost-cutting xerography for 101 Dalmatians. I'll put a link in the description for a wonderfully made video on that subject matter by the channel Moviemation. Just wait until you're done with my video first, please. Now, lower budgets for animation studios meant that they either had to innovate or cut corners and hope it still comes across as entertaining. Going into the 60s, DC Comics characters were on the steadiest ground when it came to mass media. It had the traction from the 40s Superman cartoon shorts, 4 movie serials in the 40s and 50s, and the Superman TV series with George Reeves. Of course, it took until 1966 for Superman to land another TV gig in his first TV cartoon under then fledgling studio Filmation. I'll leave a link in the description to a video that details the shrewd tactics that went into their obtaining the contract to produce their Superman cartoons. Up until then, they had been making commercials and very cheap cartoons. But now, like everyone else who will be mentioned in this video, Filmation Studios had to cut corners in comparison to what had been done to make cartoons so fluid in previous decades. And the techniques implemented were primarily creating key action sequences that could be used repeatedly in various scenarios. Stock footage. But whenever they felt there was a justification in using the sequences, they would, and some still images were used that could have background movement indicate character movement. One interesting thing is that they got the same voices for Superman and Lois Lane from the Fleischer Superman cartoons, namely Bud Collyer and Joan Alexander. Also, they landed narrator Jackson Beck, who narrated the Superman radio show, which also had Bud Collyer and Joan Alexander voicing Superman and Lois, respectively. Filmation managed to keep things going with DC the next year with the Superman Aquaman Hour, with the same animation approach, but they also featured adventures involving Green Lantern, Flash, and Superboy, voiced by then future Batman animated series Commissioner Gordon voice Bob Hastings. Batman finally got his first gig under Filmation in 1969 and was the beginning of his getting voiced by Olin Soul. Maybe it's Soleil, don't know. But he was all over TV and movies along with Mr. Radio Top 40, Casey Kasem. But these two would become the mainstay going into the 80s in these respective roles. And it had all the mainstay villains that came about up to then. Also had Alfred, Gordon, and Batgirl, and yes, it relied heavily on animated templates to use and reuse frequently. This wasn't the DC universe at its animated peak, no, but I will say they were serviceable for their time, and when a time where animation was suffering greatly, but this being the best we could get, I'd say not too bad. Now in the late 50s, Joseph Hanna and William Barbera had to live with having their productions under MGM, most notably Tom and Jerry theatrical shorts, shut down, and had to reinvent themselves with an animation method that could work under low TV budgets. Their initial answer was limited animation, where box-like characters could be moved with separate cells of body, limbs, heads, and facial features that could be put together for various poses and expressions. It ended up being key to their success that ran for decades. Now, Hanna-Barbera would of course need to modify their technique to depict realistic-looking human beings, and they had already figured that out in 1964 with Johnny Quest. But then we get Space Ghost, and in his original incarnation, he was a superhero who, with teen sidekicks Jan and Jace and Blip the Monkey, they defended the galaxy from outer space supervillains. He could turn invisible with his belt, fly all while surviving in outer space. His key weapons were his power bands, which launch various beams including heat, cold, magnetism, energy, and force. He was popular enough in the 60s that he made a comeback in the 80s. Then in the 90s, Cartoon Network aired their simulated animated spliced with live-action talk show, Space Ghost Coast to Coast. Then Marvel was fortunate enough that Hanna-Barbera picked up their first family, the Fantastic Four, and as stated in both Wikipedia and IMDb, Hanna-Barbera's agent, Cy Fisher, noticed his son reading a Fantastic Four comic book. By comparison to modern animation, it's very basic. It makes use of the core roster of Fantastic Four characters with the four of themselves: Doctor Doom, Super Skrull, Claw, and Gamma Ray, who was created just for the series. Not the best cartoon iteration of the Fantastic Four, but I'll bet that most would rather watch it than any movie release thus far of them. I will say the upcoming release of Disney does look promising. What I consider to be the best superhero spoof cartoon of the 60s is Underdog, the main part of a cartoon ensemble that included Tennessee Tuxedo, Go Go Gophers, Hoppy Hooper, and Commander McBragg. He'd have an alter ego of humble and lovable Shoeshine Boy, and their Superman parallel would be the wardrobe change in the phone booth. He had the basic flight and super strength, and when as his hero persona, he carried that bold diatribe and he spoke in rhyme. The Underdog episode would be split into 4 shorts within the hour bracket with goofy villains with even goofier plots. You've got mad scientist Simon Bar Sinister and gangster Riff Raff as the only repeating villains, with a variety of other quirky villains like Pharaoh the Ferocious, the Marbleheads, and the deliberate antithesis to Underdog, Overcat. Anyway, it ran consistently new episodes from 1964 through 1967. And all I have to say is that I love the theme song. It may be over the top, but the bold lyrics and beat gave me enough of a jolt back in my days as a gym rat to make it part of my training music mix. Not ashamed to say that at all. Now, the Fantastic Four cartoon offered the best in quality for Marvel in the 60s, and unfortunately there's quite a gap in quality between it and the next best. And it even gets worse beyond there. But thanks to the memes, everyone knows about what I'm covering next. Spider-Man does whatever a spider can. The Spider-Man cartoon that came out the same year as Hanna-Barbera's Fantastic Four was initially produced by Grand Trey Lawrence Productions, and this is where they peaked. Grand Trey Lawrence was started in 1954 by Grant Simmons, Ray Patterson, and Robert Lawrence. From their beginning, they were mostly operating under subcontracts with such studios as Walter Lantz, Hanna-Barbera, and UPA. This being the 60s, they were scratching and clawing their way to produce whatever they could, having no choice but to take shortcuts. And it's easy to pick up where they cut corners. And no doubt, due to budget limitations, you've got Spider-Man's web costume design, where the webbing only covers his mask, boots, and gloves, and stock footage would frequently be reused just even seconds apart where the same sequence is used. The show did make good use of Spidey's rogues gallery with Green Goblin, Scorpio, Mysterio, and several others. I do like how they depict J. Jonah Jameson as his grumpy self, and actor Paul Soles, who also played Hermie, the elf on Rankin Bass's Rudolph special, makes a good contrast between Spider-Man and the public Peter Parker. For all their efforts to make the Spider-Man cartoons work, Grand Trey Lawrence had to bow out over their financial straits after the first season ended, and their distributor, Krantz Films, took over and had continuing episodes helmed by Ralph Bakshi. He's famous for the 1978 Lord of the Rings cartoon, the late 80s Mighty Mouse cartoon, briefly mentioned in my last superhero cartoons video. And Cool World, also, there were several others. He was very much an advocate for rotoscoping. But now, was the budget given to him adequate? To meet that budget, he used the same stock footage of Spider-Man's main action movements from Grand Trade Lawrence, and when one desperation moved further in pulling background and villain footage from another previous Grand Trade Lawrence series, Rocket Robin Hood. Now, my insight. My first exposure to Spider-Man must have been somewhere between any Spider-Man toys, maybe coloring books that I saw in any store, and the live-action Spider-Man on the Electric Company. I'm very certain that the 67 cartoon came sometime after then, and I will say it was a weird perceptual transition for me to watch the first Bakshi Spider-Man episode of the second season, where I first learned of Spidey's origin story, and I'll say it was also the first time I ever saw a superhero cry. Mind you, I had not read any Spider-Man comics, and this was the late 70s where there weren't that many other superhero cartoons to compare to. But yeah, this was an important step in my learning of even superheroes as characters needing vulnerabilities. Now, one last video link. I left a link in the description to the video from the channel Amazing Spider Talk, where they interviewed Ralph Bakshi on the whole deal with everything he dealt with and the whole climate of 60s cartoons. Now, as I said before, we're not done with Marvel nor Grand Trade Lawrence on this subject matter. The same year as the Spider-Man cartoons, they were working on the Marvel superheroes, which was a lineup of just about everyone else in the Marvel universe. And, well, here are a few samples.
Look out, Bucky! I hear you talking, Cap. Oh, thanks to his torpedoes, Red Skull made a clean getaway.
As mighty Thor leaps to their rescue.
To give aid to the useless humans?
Buck, I'll take him.
He's vanishing.
The swordsman escaped.
But he didn't vanish willingly.
Now, who knows what everyone was doing in an effort to work things out, and you can't help but wonder how different things might have been if the budgets that were given for all these other characters could have all gone to Marvel's marquee character, Spider-Man. But I have no idea how these budgets are figured out at all, so I may be completely in the wrong frame of mind on that. Also, I have to believe that their efforts to present the characters in the style and poise of iconic Marvel artist Jack Kirby, I think they might have thought that that would win the audience over. Who knows? I mean, the images look good, just everything looks paper thin in the movement. And there were varying levels of character animation, I think, in terms of quality. I mean, Iron Man's movement was almost at the Spider-Man level. And cool factor, here, Tony Stark was voiced by John Vernon, best known for playing Dean Wormer on National Lampoon's Animal House, and the voice behind Rupert Thorne on Batman the Animated Series. But that's what I have to say about 60s cartoons for superheroes. Agree, disagree, or something I left out? Please let me know in the comment section. The link to order Sledge, the miniseries, is in the description below. Also, lots of links in both digital and paper format. Give it a look. Let's all look for civility amid all the bad news out there, social and political strife. Let's not hate. Let's find friends wherever we may go. Everyone be safe, and God bless.